real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
My monster kid is a Wolfman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I am a mother who never became a grandmother because my only son is some kind of devil worshiper who changes himself into a wolfman and steals money from poor defenseless old ladies. He's been a criminal since he was born, and now he's worse than ever. But because he always commits his crimes in his werewolf form, none of them have ever been traced back to him. Usually the police will either say I was imagining things, or else they call it an animal attack. One cop once told me I was a crazy old lady, and I should stop bothering the dogs in the neighborhood. Can you imagine? I'm not sure what I did to offend God, but it's clear that I'm being punished for something. Some children take their mother's lives when they're born, but my devil's son is the only one who took his father's life in childbirth. When he came out, he gave his father the evil eye, and that poor man fell right over on the spot and never stood up again. Nobody knows how this evil baby took his own father's life, but I saw them look at each other, and then I saw my man fall. I thought he was fainting with joy at the time, but now I relive that moment in my nightmares. The doctors and nurses told me it was random chance that my husband passed when he did, but they were wrong. My son is a monster, and he's the one who took the only man who ever loved me away. He did it just to try to show me who was boss, and he continued trying to run the house throughout his childhood. Every day of my life was a hardship after that. He couldn't be left in daycare. He was too strong and too violent. He wasn't a werewolf yet, but he was already a monster of a kid. He got into Satanism before even reaching puberty. I think he was smoking by then already too. At least he always smelled of cigarettes. And then, when he was only 14, he joined a gang and they made him into a werewolf. The first time I saw him in his other form, I didn't understand it was him. I saw some kind of an animal wearing my son's clothes, and I literally couldn't understand what I was seeing. I thought he had done something to my son and stolen his clothing, but I didn't know what this thing even was. It wasn't a bear, but I did not understand yet at that time that werewolves are actually a real thing. It's one of those subjects you really aren't allowed to talk about, but that doesn't make it any less of a real thing. From what I heard, there are no real dogmen. All of them are werewolves or skinwalkers. I don't know if I'm using the terms correctly or not, but when I say werewolf, I mean someone who is human who becomes an upright dogman. And when I say skinwalker, I'm talking about something that is not human at all, but which sometimes chooses to appear almost identical to a werewolf. I have heard skinwalkers called wizards and sorcerers, and one guy I know said they were future people from outer space. A couple of different people told me that all werewolfism can eventually trace its way back to skinwalkers, and that skinwalkers can turn you into a werewolf. I've also been told that skinwalkers are vampires, and the source of vampire myths. They can, according to this worldview, transform into a werewolf or a wolf on one hand, but also a bat or a spider as vampires are said to do. A bite or attack from a skinwalker supposedly can either turn you into a werewolf, or an undead vampire, or an undead zombie. I have a theory that it's not a literal bite which changes you. It's more the bite of being in the vicinity of these creatures. I think they vibrate differently from the way we vibrate. Like their frequency isn't the same, and that matters in some way I can't really understand or explain. But I don't think skinwalkers had anything to do with changing my monster's son. I think he just got turned by other low-level werewolves working doing the grunt work of some local organized crime gangs. The longer he was with that gang, the worse he treated me. But when they kicked him out, then things got really bad. My son couldn't control his werewolfism. He never knew when it was going to happen. He was a horrible monster to me in either form. But when he became the Wolfman, he would chase me, his own mother, around on the lawn in front of our house. I would beg him not to hurt me because if I missed work, I wouldn't be able to feed and house the two of us any longer. That would usually get him to run off and at least go bother someone who he wasn't financially dependent on. Well, I wasn't sure why or what happened, but one day, my idiot son just disappeared. I didn't see him again for decades, and honestly, I thought he had gone on to meet his maker. Those were peaceful years. Hard, but at least I got to keep the money I earned. I didn't have to give it all to my insane, violent monster of a son. That all changed a little after my 70th birthday. That was when he got out of prison and figured out where I was living. That was when my life went to hell all over again. I had been seeing a guy. He was 9 years older than me and used to joke that he was robbing the cradle. We were talking about moving into a retirement home together. But then one night, we were watching a romantic movie at my place when my devil child came home. Of course, he was in his 50s by then. He's no child any longer. When he kicked in the front door of my house and screamed that we were gonna die, my boyfriend got sick all over my couch. My son grows over 7 feet tall when he's transformed, and he barely resembles anything like a human. He just looks like a monster from hell, and it's not a sight you want to see. My monster offspring made a mess of my home and terrorized my boyfriend. He told him that if he kept dating me, he would eat every member of his family, and the poor guy left screaming. He cut me off on social media, and so did his entire family. Now I live in fear, never knowing when my son will show up and steal my social security money from me. I get direct deposit, but he just steals my debit card and goes to the bank. He's back to chasing me around in front of my own home, and I'm too old for this now. I'm not sure how much longer I'll be able to take it. He taunts me, asking me if I'm ready for a heart attack yet. The joke would be on him if I did croak, as I'd be dying in debt, and he would get nothing anyway. Maybe he thinks I've got something of value here, but thanks to him, I'm left with nothing. My cousin called me on the phone the other day complaining about how her family voted. I asked her if they chased her around on the front lawn of her home, or if they stole her food money from her. She called me a fascist for not caring and hung up. Everybody thinks their problems are worse than mine, but I've got the worst problem in the world. An ungrateful son who takes and takes, but never gives. The physical injuries, the public humiliation, those things I can stand. I know he's not a normal man, and I know he has special needs, but I could take that 10 times over and be fine with it. If only my son appreciated what I'm doing for him. If only he would say thanks sometimes. If only he would think of his mother once in a while. He steals from local stores. He eats the neighbors' pets. He's rude to everybody. He eats me out of house and home, and I don't know how to get him to leave. I live in constant terror because my monster kid is a Wolfman.
Werewolf with a shotgun, werewolf with a rifle. You don't mess with him, son, you don't want to trifle. 3 freaky deaky stories, allegedly they're true. 3 uncensored stories available for you. But just if you're a member of this channel, here's Scary Stories NYC, we give you a cheer. Secret uncensored Dogman and werewolf stories to show our channel members how thankful we are for each of them, and that means you.
Dogman and Son. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story Well, actually, I have 3 stories if you want to hear them. They're stories about me, my father, a dogman, and the dogman's father. You might say I sort of grew up with that younger dogman, at least to some extent. First, I'd better explain my father, because he's the only reason this all happened to me. Dad was not sensible. He was too friendly to too many people and animals. He always assumed the best about everyone, even when they were obviously getting ready to screw him over. This is probably why we ended up living in a cabin in the woods and hunting for a living. It wasn't that Dad didn't want to fit in. It was just that nobody else wanted him to fit in. He was an original thinker. And nobody wants a poor guy who can think for himself. That's a dangerous thing to be in the human world. Let's face it, if you're rich, they call you eccentric. But if you are not wealthy, they've got a whole long ugly list of other words that they'll apply to you. If you're born into the working class, you're not supposed to think. You're only supposed to follow orders. So when even my mom left him, Dad raised me in the woods in Pennsylvania. I had learned to read when I still went to school, and I sort of self-taught myself everything after that. We had dusty old books in that cabin that I think had belonged to a previous owner, and I read them all from cover to cover. I always wanted to be a writer, and I guess I still do. I'm hoping to retire in 5 or 6 years, so maybe that can be the time for me to start writing finally. I tell you, your channel makes me want to write stories about these dogmen we used to encounter. I guess this email is the start of me wrapping my head around all those old Pennsylvania dogman experiences. There are a couple of pioneer cemeteries in the woods near the Tuscarora State Forest. Dad and I came upon one of them randomly in the late afternoon one day as the sun was beginning to set, and it was quite a striking scene. Some of the richer people had full-on tombstones, but others had much smaller rocks placed over their final resting places. If they once had names engraved on them, I suppose those names are now as much a part of the past as the individuals whose remains they mark. It was a humbling experience, and a weirdly saddening one as well. There was this heavy mood, as though we had come there to pass on or something. I didn't like it. I wanted to get out of there, but before I could say that to my father, out of nowhere came a small gray puppy, running right up to me, then dancing and jumping at my feet. I don't think I was more than maybe 13 at the time, so the puppy and I instantly started playing and became friends inside of 2 seconds. We were having a ball, and I could hear my father laughing at our acrobatics and antics. Then, something bellowed so loudly that my ears hurt, and my knees went weak underneath me. I had only ever felt my knees do that once before, when we ran across a mama bear, and my mind went directly to the idea that this might not be a puppy that I was playing with at all. This might be a baby wolf. I must be being roared at by a mother wolf. But wait, wolves don't roar, you know? So I was moving my eyes in my head to turn to see what exactly was making that terrible shouting sound. I felt like time had slowed down to an almost halt, and I wondered if this is what you feel when you're about to pass on. When I saw what it was making that sound, my knees actually did collapse, and I fell backward clumsily, trying to catch myself on a tree, but failing. I was sitting on the ground looking up at a very angry canine, but a canine that was standing up on its hind legs. That was a feat I was unable to manage just then. I got a good long look at that mama bear dog thing, and one of the things I noticed was that it was not a mama at all. It was definitely a papa bear, but it was also definitely not a bear. To me, that looked like an upright walking wolf, but the paws were somewhat more like bear claws. I'm not sure what to compare the claws to, honestly, as they looked like dog paws, but functioned more like human hands.
Imagine bear claws with the final claw offset more like a thumb. Then imagine it looking somehow very canine. I suppose I'll have to get better at describing things if I really do want to become a writer. The short version of it was that I was looking up at the scariest monster I'd ever seen in my life. And my only question was in which way it was going to tear me apart. Was it going to stomp me out of existence? Was it going to bite my head off? It literally had jaws that looked large enough to do just that. I was seeing my short life pass in front of me. I was so sad about all the things I would never get to do. When I was sitting on the dirt looking up, that Dogman might as well have been as big as Godzilla. That's what it seemed like to me. And I was an ant underneath him. I flinched as I thought I was being attacked from the rear, but it was only my dad. He had walked up and leaned over to pull me to my feet. He whispered at me to be quiet, so I was. After I was standing again, Dad put his arm around me and I hugged him, hard. The puppy excitedly and happily danced and pranced all around, jumping up on me in a playful manner. I held my breath because I expected to either be bellowed at again or possibly something worse. Instead, that Papa Dogman just turned around and walked away from us, emerging back into the woodline. The puppy and I returned to playing, and that night he even slept just outside our tent flap as though he were guarding us. In the morning, he was gone. My father told me that the Papa Dogman had come to collect him in the night. To my father, this was the time he was proudest of me. He lectured on and on the next morning about what an honor we had just received. That Dogman respected us as fellow hunters and did not treat us as prey, my father insisted. When he saw me defend you, and when he saw his son's reaction, he realized we were the same as him. We were just carnivores, out carnivoring. Dad had a colorful way of speaking, but you always understood what he was trying to communicate. Even as a kid, I knew he was a screwball, but I loved him anyway. There's no way he would be allowed custody of me in the modern world. He was just too much of an individualist. He was a very proud American as well, which these days they say is a bad thing. Dad was a man of his time, but he was quite a man. Who else would have let his son play with a Dogman pup? My father and I encountered that Dogman again, and his son 2 more times. Those are 2 more stories I can tell, although they might not be scary enough for your channel. I mean, I guess they're scary in places. I'm an extremely lucky man. I've had multiple encounters with that Dogman family, and I came away unharmed, and I feel enriched. How many people use a word like enriched when describing their Dogman encounter? But that's how I still feel to this day about the time that my father and I encountered. Dogman and Son. We're quite grateful, if you can't tell, because of our EP Michelle. Please join me in thanking today's executive producer, Michelle Rich. In return, Michelle receives our secret uncensored Dogman stories far too wild to tell on this channel. YouTube changed something recently to severely limit our channel, and they no longer are serving our videos to people who aren't already subscribed. You need half your audience to be fresh, or else your channel stops growing and moves backward, which is what's been forced on us in the last month and a half. If you would like to see us here on into the future, please check out this important message from our buddy Henry. Thank you. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.